If I told you that there was a time when reaching the age of 12 was considered a major achievement, you probably wouldn't believe it. Honestly, when I first heard it, I thought it was strange too. But that's exactly what people have been telling each other for centuries. Did ancient humans really only live to be 12 years old? If the answer is yes, then how did the human race survive for thousands of years? And if the answer is no, then how did this idea become so widespread? To find the answer to this one question, we have to go back thousands of years, to a world where the distance between life and death was sometimes just a single day. In those days, waking up in the morning wasn't a guarantee that you would survive until evening. Every day was a new trial. Sometimes there was food, sometimes a whole day would pass hungry, sometimes a hunt was successful, and sometimes the hunter himself would become someone else's prey. But the most surprising thing is that many people did not die by sword or in battle. Sometimes, a small wound was enough to end their life. Sometimes a fever, sometimes dirty water, sometimes just a few cold nights. And sometimes it was simply that they went without food for days on end. Today, all of this seems trivial. Honestly, we probably don't even think about these things. But in that era, any one of them could be fatal. That's why when we look at life in the past, one question keeps coming up. After all, what was the reason so many people lost their lives at such a young age? Was the human body weak? Was the world more dangerous? Or was the real reason something else entirely? On this journey, with the help of archaeology, anthropology, human biology, and scientific research, we will unravel this mystery one piece at a time. And by the end, you might have a completely different view of just how difficult life really was in the ancient world. So let's begin with the first factor that determined the lives of millions of ancient people. At first glance, it seems the biggest threat in the ancient world was wild animals. But scientific research paints a completely different picture. The truth is that most people didn't die at the hands of lions or bears. They fell victim to enemies that couldn't even be seen. The very first enemy was childhood. Today, if a newborn is weak, gets an infection, or develops a high fever, doctors and medicines can save its life. But thousands of years ago, none of that existed. A simple infection, a few days of diarrhea, or a lack of clean water could prove fatal for a small child. That's why many children didn't even live to see their first birthday. Anyone who made it past childhood had climbed over life's greatest wall. But the hardships didn't end there. Every day you had to find food. If you didn't find any prey, your stomach would go empty. If the weather turned bad, you wouldn't find anything to eat for days. And when the body doesn't get the necessary nutrition, it becomes even more vulnerable to diseases. After that came the third danger: injuries. Today, if you get a small cut, we apply antiseptic and put on a bandage. But back then, even a small wound could become infested with bacteria. There were no antibiotics, no surgery, no modern treatment. If the infection spread into the bloodstream, it was very difficult to survive. And this didn't just happen to hunters. Honestly, a lot of people forget that. People were injured even while chopping wood, breaking stones, or doing everyday tasks. The many ancient bones found by archaeologists are proof that people often suffered fractures, infections, and extraordinary physical stress. So the question is, if childhood was so dangerous, and there was such a huge risk of death every day, then how did some people manage to live to old age? The answer doesn't lie just in strength, but in humanity's greatest superpower: coming together. If only strength had decided survival, then perhaps humans would never have come to rule the world, because he couldn't run the fastest, his teeth weren't the most powerful, and he didn't have the strength of a predator. And yet, he survived. The question is, how? The answer was sticking together. When a hunter was wounded while hunting, it didn't always end his journey there. Archaeologists have found many bones bearing old fracture marks, and the most surprising thing is that those fractures had healed. This meant that the person survived for weeks or even months after being injured. And this was only possible if his tribe took care of him. Someone brought him food, someone protected him, and someone stayed with him until he could walk again. This was the true power of humanity. But not everyone was so lucky. If the tribe was small, food was scarce, or the weather would change suddenly. And the weakest people would be the first to suffer: children, the elderly, and the wounded. That's why a single cold season, a prolonged famine, or a failure to hunt could change the fate of the entire tribe. And then there was another silent killer: childbirth. Today, childbirth is supported by doctors, hospitals, and emergency care. But in those days, Childbirth was a matter of life and death for both mother and child. If any complication arose, or if too much blood was lost, there was no hospital to turn to for help. That's why many women and newborn babies didn't survive. In the ancient world, death didn't come only from war or hunting. Sometimes it came at the moment of birth, sometimes in childhood, and sometimes in the form of a simple infection. But still, the human race did not end. So what changed that slowly began to lengthen human life? The answer lies in the evidence from archaeology and science, preserved underground for thousands of years. Thousands of years passed. Tribes were buried in the earth, forests changed, and the very map of the world was altered. But the earth held on to one thing: evidence. Today, when archaeologists study ancient cemeteries, bones, and human remains, they don't just look at the bones. They estimate their age, they determine their diet, they look for signs of their injuries, and sometimes they can even figure out what might have caused death. This research has revealed something very interesting. In the ancient world, many children never even reached adulthood, but those who made it through the dangerous years of childhood, many of them lived to be 30, 40, 50 years, and some even longer. In other words, the real secret wasn't just about longevity, it was about surviving childhood. That's why when people say ancient humans only lived 12 years, they're telling only part of the story. The reality was that so many children died at such a young age that the average lifespan of the entire population was very low. But the person who made it past those first dangerous years had a chance to live a long life. This wasn't just found in one place. From Africa to Europe, from Asia to the ancient Americas, evidence from various archaeological sites paints a similar picture. The locations kept changing, the climate changed. But one thing was almost the same everywhere. The toughest battle was fought in childhood. And maybe that's why today we take a simple fever, an antibiotic, or clean water for granted. Those very things used to be the biggest difference between life and death. But if today we are living much longer than before, then what changed in human history? The answer to that question will be found in the final part of this documentary. If today you are 30, 40, or 50 years old, thousands of years ago, people would have considered your life not short, but very long. But that was only possible if you survived childhood, hunger, disease, injuries, and merciless weather. There was no single miracle that changed human life. It was the result of small changes over thousands of years. People learned to use fire more effectively. They made better tools. They built stronger shelters. They learned to obtain and store food more safely. Then, gradually, human knowledge grew. But the greatest change came much later, when clean water, sanitation, vaccines, antibiotics, and modern medicine weakened the enemies that once claimed millions of lives. Today, an infection that was once a death sentence is often cured with just a few days of treatment. Today, a wound that could once end a life. It has become routine treatment in hospitals. That's why today, when we hear that ancient humans lived only 12 years, the real question shouldn't be how long they lived. The real question should be, why was it so hard for them to survive? And perhaps the answer to that question teaches us to appreciate the value of our own lives. Every time you drink clean water, go to the doctor, or take a small medicine and get better, remember, it's not just today's technology. It's the result of thousands of years of human labor, experience, and the story of survival. We're not different from our ancestors because we're more intelligent. We're able to live longer because each generation has made life a little safer for the next. And maybe the greatest legacy of ancient humans wasn't their short lives, but that even in such a harsh world, they kept the human race alive so that one day we could stand here and tell their story. And that is the greatest miracle of human history.